Homesteading, page 110. Canning. Canning is a method of preserving food that employs heat processing in airtight, vacuum-sealed containers so that food can be safely stored at normal home temperatures. Canning salt, also called pickling salt. It is regular table salt without the anti-caking or iodine additives. Citric acid, a form of acid that can be added to canned foods. It increases the acidity of low acid foods and may improve their flavor. Cold pack, a canning procedure in which jars are filled with raw food. Raw pack is the preferred term for describing this practice. Cold pack is often used incorrectly to refer to foods that are open, kettle canned, or jars that are heat processed in boiling water. Enzymes, proteins in food that accelerate many flavor, color, texture, and nutritional changes, especially when food is cut, sliced, crushed, bruised, or exposed to air. Proper blanching or hot packing practices destroy enzymes and improve food quality. Exhausting, removing air from within and around food and from jars and canners. Exhausting or venting of pressure canners is necessary to prevent botulism in low-acid canned foods. Headspace, the unfilled space above food or liquid in jars that allows for food expansion as jars are heated and for forming vacuums as jars cool. Heat processing, treatment of jars with sufficient heat to enable storing food at normal home temperatures. Hermetic seal, an absolutely airtight container seal that prevents re-entry of air or microorganisms into packaged foods. Hot pack, heating of raw food in boiling water or steam and filling it hot into jars. Low acid foods, foods that contain very little acid and have a pH above 4.6. The acidity in these foods is insufficient to prevent the growth of botulism bacteria. Vegetables, some varieties of tomatoes, figs, all meats, fish, seafood, and some dairy products are low acid foods. To control all risks of botulism, jars of these foods must be either heat processed in a pressure canner or acidified to a pH of 4.6 or lower before being processed in boiling water. Microorganisms, independent organisms of microscopic size, including bacteria, yeast, and mold. In a suitable environment, they grow rapidly and may divide or reproduce every 10 to 30 minutes. Therefore, they reach high populations very quickly. Microorganisms are sometimes intentionally added to ferment foods, make antibiotics, and for other reasons. Undesirable microorganisms cause disease and food spoilage. Mold, a fungus-type microorganism whose growth on food is usually visible and colorful. Molds may grow on many foods, including acid foods like jams and jellies and canned fruits. Recommended heat processing and sealing practices prevent their growth on these foods. Mycotoxins or mycotoxins. Toxins produced by the growth of some molds on foods. Open kettle canning, a non-recommended canning method. Food is heat processed in a covered kettle, filled while hot into sterile jars, and then sealed. Foods canned this way have low vacuums or too much air, which permits rapid loss of quality in foods. Also, these foods often spoil because they become recontaminated while the jars are being filled. Pasteurization. Heating food to temperatures high enough to destroy disease-causing microorganisms. pH. A measure of acidity or alkalinity. Values range from 0 to 14. A food is neutral when its pH is 7.0. Lower values are increasingly more acidic. Higher values are increasingly more alkaline. PSIG, pounds per square inch of pressure as measured by a gauge. Pressure canner, a specifically designed metal kettle with a lockable lid used for heat processing low acid food. These canners have jar racks, one or more safety devices, systems for exhausting air, and a way to measure or control measure. Canners with 20 to 21 quart capacity are common. The minimum size of canner that should be used has a 16 quart capacity and can hold 7 1-quart jars. Use of pressure saucepans with a capacity of less than 16 quarts is not recommended. Raw pack. The practice of filling jars with raw, unheated food. Acceptable for canning low acid foods, but allows more rapid quality losses in acid foods that are heat processed in boiling water, also called cold pack. Style of pack. Form of canned food such as whole, sliced, piece, juice, or sauce. The term may also be used to specify whether food is filled raw or hot into jars. Vacuum, a state of negative pressure that reflects how thoroughly air is removed from within a jar of processed food. The higher the vacuum, the less air left in the jar. Proper canning practices. Growth of the bacterium Clostridium botulinum in canned food may cause botulism, a deadly form, page 111, of food poisoning. These bacteria exist either as spores or as vegetable cells. The spores, which are comparable to plant seeds, can survive harmlessly in soil and water for many years. When ideal conditions exist for growth, the spores produce vegetative cells, which multiply rapidly and may produce a deadly toxin within 3 to 4 days in an environment consisting of a moist, low-acid food, a temperature between 40 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and less than 2% oxygen. Botulinum spores are on most fresh food surfaces. Because they grow only in the absence of air, they are harmless on fresh foods. Most bacteria, yeasts, and molds are difficult to remove from food surfaces. Washing fresh food reduces their numbers only slightly. Peeling root crops, underground stem crops, and tomatoes reduce their numbers greatly. Blanching also helps, but the vital controls are the method of canning and use of the recommended research-based processing times. These processing times ensure destruction of the largest expected number of heat-resistant microorganisms in home canned foods. Properly sterilized canned food will be free of spoilage if lids, seal, and jars are stored below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Storing jars at 50 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit enhances retention of quality. Food acidity and processing methods. Whether food should be processed in a pressure canner or boiling water canner to control botulism bacteria depends on the acidity in the food. Acidity may be natural, as in most fruits, or added, as in pickled food. Low acid canned foods contain too little acidity to prevent the growth of these bacteria. Other foods may contain enough acidity to block their growth or to destroy them rapidly when heated. The term pH is a measure of acidity. The lower its value, the more acidic the food. The acidity levels in food can be increased by adding lemon juice, citric acid, or vinegar. Low acid foods have pH values higher than 4.6. They include red meats, seafood, poultry, milk, and all fresh vegetables except for most tomatoes. Most products that are mixtures of low acid and acid foods also have pH values above 4.6 unless their ingredients include enough lemon juice, citric acid, or vinegar to make them acid foods. Acid foods have a pH of 4.6 or lower. They include fruits, pickles, sauerkraut, jams, jellies, marmalade, and fruit butters. Although tomatoes usually are considered an acid food, some are now known to have pH values slightly above 4.6. Figs also have pH values slightly above 4.6. Therefore, if they are to be canned as acid foods, these products must be acidified to a pH of 4.6 or lower with lemon juice or citric acid. Properly acidified tomatoes and figs are acid foods and can be safely processed in a boiling water canner. Botulinum spores are very hard to destroy at boiling water temperatures. The higher the canner temperature, the more easily they are destroyed. Therefore, all low-acid foods should be sterilized at temperatures of 240 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, attainable with pressure canners operated at 10 to 15 psig. PSIG, pressure canners operate at, means pounds per square inch of pressure as measured by a gauge. At these temperatures, the time needed to destroy bacteria in low-acid canned foods ranges from 20 to 100 minutes. The exact time depends on the kind of food being canned, the way it is packed into jars, and the size of jars. The time needed to safely process low-acid foods in boiling water ranges from 7 to 11 hours. The time needed to process acid foods in boiling water varies from 5 to 85 minutes. Know your altitude. It is important to know your approximate elevation or altitude above sea level in order to determine a safe processing time for canned foods. Since the boiling temperature of liquid is lower at higher elevations, it is critical that additional time be given for the safe processing of foods at altitudes above sea level. What not to do. Open kettle canning and the processing of freshly filled jars in conventional ovens Microwave ovens and dishwashers are not recommended because these practices do not prevent all risks of spoilage. Steam canners are not recommended because processing times for use with current models have not been adequately researched. Because steam canners may not heat foods in the same manner as boiling water canners, their use with boiling water processing times may result in spoilage. So-called canning powders are useless as preservatives and do not replace the need for proper heat processing. It is not recommended that pressures in excess of 15 psig be applied when using new pressure canning equipment. Ensuring high-quality canned foods. Examine food carefully for freshness and wholesomeness. Discard diseased and moldy food. Trim small diseased lesions or spots from food.